On the morning of December 26, 2004, coastlines across the Indian Ocean began to behave in unexpected ways as the sea quietly withdrew from distant beaches without storms, warning, or an obvious cause. In some places, the ocean pulled back slowly, exposing the seafloor and leaving boats resting on dry sand, while people stood still, unsure whether they were witnessing something harmless or something profoundly wrong. This was not a local event, and it was not confined to one country, because the same ocean was already moving as a single system, carrying energy outward across entire basins toward distant shores. At the center of it all was northern Sumatra, where the Earth itself had just ruptured along a massive fault beneath the sea, releasing energy on a scale rarely recorded in human history. In Aceh, Indonesia, there would be no retreat, no confusion, and consider no warning at all, because the ocean did not pull back gently there. It arrived almost immediately, marking the place where the tsunami began its deadliest chapter. Beneath the Indian Ocean, the seafloor had shifted suddenly along a massive subduction zone, where one tectonic plate was forced beneath another, lifting and dropping the ocean floor in a matter of minutes. That vertical movement displaced an enormous volume of water, not by creating waves at the surface, but by pushing the entire water column upward and outward from the rupture zone. Unlike storm waves, this movement carried energy through the full depth of the ocean, allowing it to travel vast distances with very little loss of power, even as the surface above appeared calm and unchanged. In deep water, the tsunami moved at jetliner speeds, invisible to those above, carrying destruction across the basin long before any shoreline felt its approach. Only when the wave reached shallow coastal waters did its true nature begin to reveal itself, as the slowing water rose upward, concentrating energy into a wall of moving sea. In Aceh, Indonesia, the distance between the rupture zone and the coastline was so short that the tsunami arrived almost immediately, leaving no meaningful gap between cause and impact. There was no slow retreat of the sea here, no time for interpretation or hesitation, because the first surge struck while the ground was still shaking beneath people's feet. Entire neighborhoods were hit by a wall of water moving faster than people could run, carrying debris, vehicles, and fragments of structures in a dense, crushing flow. As the water surged inland, it stripped buildings from their foundations and erased streets entirely, transforming familiar city blocks into an unrecognizable floodplain in minutes. When the water finally slowed, it did not leave devastation behind. It left absence, where entire sections of the city had simply been removed from the landscape. In Phuket, Thailand, the tsunami did not arrive immediately, and that delay created a dangerous illusion of safety along beaches crowded with tourists and locals. As the water pulled back, the exposed seafloor drew people closer instead of pushing them away, turning curiosity into fatal proximity as the shoreline became a place of growing danger. What few recognized was that this retreat was not the end of the event, but the warning phase of a much larger wave already moving toward the shore, still hidden beyond the visible horizon. When the water returned, it did not come back gently. It surged inland with accelerating force, collapsing structures and sweeping people from the shoreline within seconds. The delay that once seemed protective became the reason so many were still exposed, leaving people in the open when the full force of the impact finally arrived. As the tsunami traveled away from the rupture zone, its energy did not fade, but interacted with the shape of the seafloor, where depth and slope began to control how that energy behaved. In deep water, the wave remained low and fast, but as it entered shallower regions, friction with the seafloor forced the water to slow down and rise upward. This process compressed the same amount of energy into a smaller volume, gradually converting horizontal motion into vertical height as the waves slowed and approached land. Local geography intensified these effects as bays, shelves, and coastlines shaped how energy was focused, reflected, or trapped before release. This is why the same tsunami produced very different outcomes because while the energy was shared across the ocean, the damage was decided by depth, shape, and distance from the source. In Sri Lanka, the tsunami arrived hours after the earthquake, crossing the Indian Ocean with little loss of energy, despite the immense distance from its source. For many, the absence of shaking and the long delay reinforced the belief that the danger had passed, even as the ocean continued moving toward the coast. When the tsunami finally reached shallow water, its speed dropped sharply, forcing the energy upward into rapidly rising floodwaters. Entire stretches of coastline were overwhelmed as water rushed inland with sustained force, flooding far beyond the reach of ordinary storm surges. The distance that once seemed protective instead allowed the tsunami to arrive intact, demonstrating that energy does not weaken simply because it travels far. Along the coast of Somalia, thousands of kilometers from the earthquake, the ground never shook, and yet the ocean still arrived with lethal force. With no local earthquake to serve as a warning, coastal communities had no reason to expect danger from a calm and distant sea, which appeared ordinary right up until the moment it turned destructive. When the water surged inland, it came without context or explanation, flooding communities that had no connection to the rupture that caused it. This impact confirmed that the tsunami was not a regional disaster, but a basin-wide event capable of crossing entire oceans and affecting distant coastlines far from its source. The same energy released near Sumatra had traveled across continents, arriving in Africa still strong enough to kill, proving that distance alone does not dilute mass or momentum. Across every affected coastline, the same pattern emerged, not driven by chance, but by the physical rules governing how energy moves through the ocean. Where the ocean floor rose gradually, water slowed and climbed, converting speed into height and turning invisible motion into destructive mass. Where coastlines funneled water inward, energy was concentrated, intensifying destruction far beyond what distance alone would suggest. Where warning signs were misunderstood or ignored, exposure increased, turning moments of curiosity or hesitation into fatal vulnerability. In contrast, areas with elevation, distance, or rapid evacuation experienced the same wave with dramatically different outcomes. These differences did not come from the tsunami itself, but from how land, water, and time interacted differently at each location along the coast. The tsunami did not choose its victims. It followed depth, slope, and momentum, applying the same rules everywhere it reached. What appeared unpredictable was, in reality, the result of unseen processes unfolding far from where the damage finally appeared. By the time the ocean arrived at distant shores, the outcome had already been decided beneath the sea hours earlier, long before any warning or response was possible. The Indian Ocean tsunami revealed not chaos, but a system responding exactly as physics demands when its limits are exceeded, following rules that never pause or adapt to human presence. Long before waves reached land, the disaster was already complete, sealed by immense forces moving far beneath the ocean floor, long before any coastline felt the impact. No sirens, no warnings, and no last-minute actions could change what physics had already set in motion hours earlier, long before any response could even begin. The ocean did not act with intent or anger. It simply moved as gravity and momentum required, pushing forward with unstoppable mass rather than emotion or choice. Every wall that fell and every structure that remained standing reflected nothing more than elevation, depth, and timing, drawing a brutal line between destruction and survival. What made the Indian Ocean tsunami so deadly was not surprise alone, but the enormous scale at which energy was allowed to move unchecked across an entire ocean basin. Across thousands of kilometers, the same water followed the same physical rules, producing radically different outcomes, only where geography intervened along the coast. The lesson was not that nature is unpredictable, but that its signals are often misunderstood or ignored until consequences arrive with irreversible force. When warning signs are ignored or misread, The margin between survival and loss collapses rapidly, shrinking to seconds and meters that cannot be recovered. The Indian Ocean tsunami was not a failure of the planet, but a stark reminder of how natural systems behave when physical limits are exceeded without restraint. When the ocean turned deadly, it did not change its rules. It revealed them in full, exposing limits that had always existed beneath the surface.